it looks like, cover why we need to use an LNRS, all the problems that the strategy itself seeks to address, how the LNRS is already being used, so some exciting good news stories that we can share with you, and some more in the pipeline. How, as the school and education community across the island, you can start using the Isle of Wight LNRS to support your work that you're already carrying out on your school sites, and some sort of beginner and starter actions that can be possible on school sites to support nature recovery. So starting off with, what a LNRS is. So an LNRS, and I apologise for the acronyms, there's probably going to be a few, but these are local nature recovery strategies. They are a new spatial plan that have been required by government across all 48 county areas across England. So the Isle of Wight is not alone in this. Every county across England has been on a 2 to 3 year journey producing and now publishing the strategies. The LNRS is co-produced with a really wide set of local stakeholders and members of the community to help define those locally important habitats and species and what the people locally feel are the priorities and actions required to support their recovery. Unlike previous plans and strategies that have come before, the LNRS actually maps out areas where certain measures and actions can have the biggest impact for local habitats and species, as well as supporting benefits that go alongside this, like climate change adaptation or supporting people access and engage with nature. So LNRSs have come about really to address a whole wall of pressures and threats that not only the UK faces, but as a global community we're facing. One of the big ones is biodiversity loss. Across the world, species have been declining since about sharply the 1970s. The UK has been named the most nature depleted country in the world, with 1 in 6 of our species at risk of extinction. So really, really scary stuff that can have impacts across food chains, the health of habitats, and these are amazing species that should not be threatened to be lost due to mostly human forced impacts. So the LNRS, its key job is to address that problem and help recover those numbers of species that are declining through making sure the right actions are happening in the right places with a really local focus and feel from the strategy. As I mentioned, the LNRS also has a job to support building more climate change resilience into local areas. So this can look like making sure any wetland restoration that happens also has benefits for local communities that are threatened by flooding. So by making sure the wetlands are spongy enough, they can take more of that flooding impact, removing that threat from local communities that would otherwise experience those negative impacts of flooding. The LNRSs are seen by the UK government as these really, really important tools that, once working together in this brilliant patchwork across the country, will be feeding back up to national government and enable the country to report back on its national and international targets. So, as a global community, we've signed ourselves up to a whole set of different targets and things we want to achieve in relation to species, in relation to habitats, in relation to climate change. And the LNRSs are going to be that key vehicle where they're going to be able to get that insight and achieve those targets. The LNRSs also enable local communities, councils, organisations to make those decisions that have come from local information and insight instead of a top-down approach where governments try and treat this really complex problem that we're facing as a one size fits all. Local priorities and what's actually possible in a place can come through in this strategy and be used by those decision makers. As I mentioned, the LNRS also creates opportunity for more local people to access and engage with nature. Making sure that is a priority is so key because alongside all of these issues, we're also up against a well-being and mental health crisis. making sure that there's access and engagement opportunity to our amazing green and blue spaces, especially given that we are on an island so rich in all of those amazing things, is really important. So bringing wildlife back into the places where the people are, and ensuring there is that harmony between wildlife and people and that they can work together is really important for shifting the dial on access to nature. And summarizing all of that, essentially the LNRS is this tool for spatially coordinated action. As I mentioned, the LNRS comes with a map of where all these different actions and priorities can be carried out that have the biggest impact. So that means where if you were to do something in a certain place, you're not only supporting a group of species, but you're also tackling the climate change problem. You're ensuring that people have greater access and engagement with nature, and you're giving, as a country, us the biggest uplift against our national and international targets. So the Isle of Wight LNRS was published in May this year. We were the fourth published in the country, so a really brilliant achievement for the Isle of Wight. And we have been named by the government as a national exemplar and blueprint for other LNRSs to follow. So nice one at Isle of Wight, very good representation there. The LNRS was produced from a 2 year long process of hugely wide-reaching engagement, lots and lots of data analysis, over 200 engagement events with local communities and stakeholders, and bringing in all our local species specialists to really input as much detail and prioritization into these strategies as possible. So not only are they the most accurate from the best available information we have, but also giving us the best chance of them being deliverable. The LNRS is split up into four components. So these four documents pictured here, they exist as physical documents, so you can go to any library on the Isle of Wight and have a browse through them. They're beautifully illustrated, or you can download them as PDFs on the website, which I'll show in a bit. But yeah, essentially split up into these four components. Part one is the description of the strategy area. So this is the essentially the history and the explanation of why the Isle of Wight is so brilliant and looks the way it does, documenting right back through prehistory, all the land use changes that has happened since and has shaped our landscapes as we know them today. Importantly, this part also explains what pressures these habitats and species are up against and what the opportunities might be to support their recovery. This then leads nicely on to part two, which outlines all of those priorities for recovery across all our habitat types on the island, and importantly, what actions can be undertaken to achieve those priorities, really breaking it down into what that detail means to deliver that on a site. So hopefully that is the sufficient information for somebody to take that away, understand what they can do on their site, and have the detail behind them to really equip them delivering that on site. And then part three outlines all of the weird and wonderful species that we have on the Isle of Wight, prioritised in a very short list of about 400 that have been recognised to be needing key action within the duration of the LNRS. So again, these are brilliant. This is a brilliant resource to use as a communication and engagement piece. Some really charismatic species in there that can be used to champion a lot of the actions that are needed, but also benefit a whole load of other things that can sit behind the species. And then finally, there's a technical methods document that outlines all of the people that were engaged during the strategy process, all of the data sets that have gone into building it, and other process information. Now, my favourite bit of the LNRS, as a mappy person, is the local habitat map. So alongside the documents that outline what the issues are, what needs to happen, how they need to be carried out, what species benefit, this map explains where these things need to happen. We need to, there's an appreciation that we can't do everything everywhere, but there are some areas on the Isle of Wight that desperately need our help to really turn the trends on habitat and species decline. So what the local habitat map shows, in the blue, we've got what's known as the areas of particular importance for biodiversity. Now, this is essentially our protected site network. So these are sites that have been recognised either locally by our local council, nationally by national government, or internationally for their importance for supporting key species, key habitats, or important geology. So by being a protected site, in some shape or form, they're already recognised and protected under existing policy and law. So the job of the LNRS as a new piece of local policy is to recognise areas that currently fall outside of this protected network and bring them to the forefront of this map. And this is what we can see in the green. These are the areas that could become of particular importance for biodiversity. So currently they aren't protected under any local, national or international policy or law, but they hold immense opportunity if receiving the right actions to support amazing habitat recovery and species recovery, as well as all those other benefits that I listed earlier. And as I said, the LNRS published in May means we are now fully into delivery mode. So these documents that outline what the problems are and what needs to happen, equipped with the map telling us where we need to be doing these things, means we've already, alongside a big delivery partnership on the island, can go away and start using the LNRS and delivering benefits for nature. So just to give you some examples of what that's looking like, even just in the past few months. The picture on the left is the sadly declining but very important population of sanderling. So these are a bird that come here in the winter and feed and roost, so rest on our shores. However, because of recreational disturbance, so simply just from people walking their dogs, running on the beach, going fishing, it stresses them out. They get really stressed out, and that is a real loss of energy for them, causing them to reduce their range, so much so they pretty much huddle up next to the hovercraft pad. This is a problem because this is their population is one of the reasons why one of our protected sites is so important. So because of the LNRS that has mapped out this area and said this is an important area for supporting the sanderling population, we've been able to use that, attract some funding because the LNRS says it, so it's a policy, therefore it needs funding, and been able to work with a wide set of partners, including local councils, Hover Travel, Ride Marina, and the Natural England, the natural environment government body, to fund and deliver a project that supports these species. On the right, we've also got a picture of peacock's tail, which is something you may recognise if you visit the shores at Bembridge. A really interesting species that is showing resilience to climate change and heat stress. Again, because it's been named as one of those priority species in that document 3 in the LNRS, we've been able to hook into some funding and then bring some research and data type projects to support this species and inform its future recovery on the island. So I'll now pass to Ian to explain how this can be relevant in a school setting.
Great, thanks very much, Deneen. So you've seen the mapped visualization of the LNRS. So that's landscape scale across 380 square kilometres of the island and about another 12 square kilometres of intertidal. So it's across an enormous area. But the principles of how to intervene for wildlife, how to actually make nature recovery a reality, can also scale in a similar way. You can go from landscape scale right the way down to an individual site. And Deneen will show you how the map works in that way, going from the whole of the island down to your site so that you can really get engaged with the detail at that level. But we just wanted to run through some of the ideas. And if you look at volume one, the first book of the LNRS, there are some of those general principles about nature recovery and how it works and why it matters. We can actually turn into practical tools for making a difference where you are. And schools and the school estate, the educational estate, really does matter because it's 50 or so localities spread all across the island. So there really isn't really a bit of the LNRS in terms of those zones that you saw that Deneen showed you that doesn't have a school in it or near it. So in terms of let's call it the biogeography of the island, schools are a fantastic way of sampling that. So every school has something to offer that bit of the LNRS, that bit of the island's natural geography. And if you lump it all together, it's a very crude measure, but you get somewhere near a square kilometre of actual grounds, buildings and grounds, all of which, because they're a common estate, so we can kind of do stuff within them without worrying too much, potentially, and that they have an educational output. So we can integrate the idea of doing stuff for wildlife with doing stuff for education in the same place at the same time. That square kilometre, and that's just the flat area. When we think about it in 3D, it gets much bigger, of course, has an enormous amount of potential to offer real nature recovery. So within your school, so you haven't necessarily got to just go out and find nature. This is about pulling nature into your school, into the grounds that you have some control over and which you can engage with in all sorts of interesting ways through the activity of your school. And of course, there's the population of teachers and the sort of wider school staff and the young people and students themselves. That's 18,000 people straight away, potentially deeply engaged, already engaged in ideas about the environment, climate change, and nature recovery fits beautifully into that. So the whole business of schools, their population, and their estate is really extremely important. And we've worked quite hard to make sure that's reflected in the wording of the LNRS. So it really matters, and it's fantastic that you're here this evening and beginning to get engaged in some of those possibilities. So we're just going to run through some ideas on with the next one. Thanks, Deneen. Yeah, so here are some actions that you can do in and around your school, practical, simple tools that are drawn from the wider LNRS. So they're already compatible. If you do these things, they synchronize with the wider LNRS, and you can explore that as far as you wish to around the mapping tool that you'll have a look at in a moment. But even if you just try some of these things out, you'll see a benefit in terms of attracting additional wildlife, having a closer encounter with the natural world that's accessible to you as an educational resource within your school. So on to the next one. Thank you, Denise. So the first one is really the importance of bare ground. So in the LNRS, we talk a lot about this, how important bare ground is. You haven't got to have plant cover. You haven't got to have it covered in wildflowers necessarily for ground to be useful. Having access to bare ground is really super important for a whole range of species. So ground beetles, a lot of flightless stuff, of course, inevitably needs bare ground. And bare ground without a continuous cover of grass is a really interesting and complex environment. It has dips and hollows, it has warm bits, it has cool bits, it has dry bits, wet bits, it has leaf litter, dead material. So it's a really interesting and dynamic environment. So having bare bits in your flower beds, having a bit of raw sand or clay or chalk, wherever your school might be, where a verge has got scuffed or a bit of the grounds haven't quite been finished. Absolutely brilliant for wildlife. From a wildlife point of view, every one of those little bits has a part to play. So a gravel track or a scuffed bit of the football field, when it's not having football played, or not even when it is to some extent, it will be supporting very interesting wildlife that needs that kind of bare ground. And that alongside that, you get flowers for free. So if you do have areas that are pollinizable by wildflowers, either from the seed bank that's in there, so let's call them weeds, but these are generally speaking useful provisioning plants that are offering food in the form of nectar and pollen, seeds and foliage. You will get this spontaneous flora by allowing some bare ground to be part of your school grounds or creating bare ground. And you can do that even in pots, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So giving space for natural colonization, So that's seeds and plant material coming into your school on the air and finding a place to take root and grow, or stuff that's already in the seed bank and actually integrating that in. So you can have a wonderfully designed flower bed with lots of really fantastic plants for wildlife from garden centres. So ornamental flowers, that's fantastic. But in amongst it, you can have familiar things like dandelions and dead nettles, or even nettles and brambles, and perhaps corners of where they're less of a problem for day-to-day school activity, but a wide range of spontaneous flora coming up through bare ground as a key part of the way you think about your school grounds will bring additional wildlife. It will greatly boost the wildlife that you will see and encounter and that will be present within your school without you really having to do anything except give it space. And one of the key things in the LNRS is this idea of treating nature as an equal partner. So giving it room to make its own decisions. We haven't got to necessarily make decisions all the time for it by having this plant in this place and this plant in this place. Giving some space, bare ground is a great way of doing this, for nature to kind of intervene on its own terms, fantastic. And it works really well. The bare ground and the plants that it produces can be fantastically useful to you across all parts of your school. However unpromising they may seem, they'll be doing something. Okay, next one, please, Denise. Thank you. So you can add to this, and if you don't have very extensive school grounds, or if they are largely hard surfaces are still good because they still have little edges and they have cracks and they have margins and they have corners and they have moss and they have lichens, they have spontaneous flora of their own, all of which are valuable. You can, of course, import these kinds of things by using pots and planters, and they can be improvised, as you can see, from materials, from found and reused objects, salvaged bits of kit that you can turn into planters, or of course they can be ready-made pots from garden centres. Those provide a fantastic way of building up wildlife gardens, and they too can contain some bare ground. So if you have a pot garden with plenty of pots, try and make them at different heights. So think about everything in terms of 3D. So different species operate at different levels. Some may prefer a warmer terrace closer to perhaps a hot playground. Some will go for a terrace that's further up. But by staggering pots or just getting pots at different scales, you're providing a more complex environment. And the more varied you can make even little patches of space that you are working in for wildlife, the more wildlife will find you. So complexity is key. If everything's flat and smooth, you get the least. If everything is bumpy and lumpy and full of terraced heights and a variety of aspects, warm and dry, wet and cool, then you'll be getting a much wider range of wildlife. So pots and planters are fantastic. You can again leave some to spontaneously work themselves out and they will fill with plants in their own time. And it's great to have some doing that. And you can have some with sand and you can have some with clay and some with chalk. So you can use geology to help you diversify the kind of plants that are going to find their way into your playground. And of course, you can, as part of the school curriculum, perhaps, or part of the activity of the young people in the school, design some of these things, carefully select some of the plants that you want. Perhaps some you'll have with just one fantastic species in one pot and another with 20, which you can cram into even a very small pot. So you can really create an enormous amount of diversity of plant material, of surfaces. Don't forget that the surfaces of the pots, whatever they are, will also be habitat. So that metal planter on the left, that will heat up in the summer or even in the autumn, even on a sunny day in the winter. It will be a basking site for lots of invertebrates. So hoverflies will find their way to it, butterflies will find their way to it. So even the surfaces of the planters are useful. You can see the one on the right-hand side has been deliberately made out of perforated metal. And the reason for that is that even though it's filled with soil, some things, mining bees are a really good example, can burrow their way in through that perforated surface and use all of the soil down to the bottom. Quite often we think of a planter as just the plants on the top, but it's the full depth of soil. You'll have seen city centre planters that are absolutely enormous, at least a metre deep, full of little herbaceous plants. Well, their roots are going to be 20 centimetres at the most. So why don't we try and use the whole depth of the planter by drilling holes further down, letting things live in there? If you do have big, deep planters, think about burying some stuff within the planter too. So dead wood, sticks, a bit of compost, again, just to break up the space within, create voids and hollows. So just one planter you can turn into an entire ecosystem by thinking about the planter, the space behind it, the space under it, the soil within it, the plants and the different heights they reach within it, and what food they provide. So you can really go to town with planters, pots, and create these kind of planets. These we call it a three-pot planet. If you have three pots, you can create an entire planet as far as small invertebrates are concerned. So really think about what you can do with these imported ecosystems, which you can then move about. If you decide to put it in a different corner, you can move the whole thing somewhere else. Okay, next one, please, Denise. Thank you. Um, Lumpy ground. So again, we kind of leave school grounds and indeed all of our green space, whether it's amenity space in the parish or our own lawns, as flat green space, because it's easy to maintain, but that is the smallest surface area and is the least topographically interesting surface you can get, and therefore it minimizes wildlife activity. So if you want to really ramp up ecological value, increase the scope for nature recovery, you want 3D interesting and complex surfaces. Now, of course, that has a maintenance requirement to it, and it may be that you can only do this in certain parts of the school. But again, it hasn't got to be huge. It can be in just parts of that space, and it can be small. Or if you're brave, you can go for it on a much wider scale if you have redundant green space. Perhaps you're excavating grounds for footing somewhere else within the school premises. Don't lose that material. Use it to create lumps and heaps and embankments and bunds so that you can reuse material within the school grounds to create lumpy surfaces. And again, allow them to colonize, plant some wildflower seed mixes for sure. But just by having this 3D complex shape, you'll be creating a huge variety niches for wildlife because some of it will collect water in the winter, some will be dry. The steeper slopes will have very thin soils. There'll always be a bit of bare ground on them, and lots of things will home in on that. The deeper bits on the hollows will have deeper soil, and they'll have different things living in there. So these tiny variations that you will create by making a more complex 3D lumpy surface, wildlife will respond to it instantly. You can leave nature to figure out what it wants to do with that space, but by offering a more complex, interesting topography, land surface for wildlife to colonize, you will get more wildlife. Molehills are great already because they're doing that job for you. So where it's not in the middle of the football field, leave them to it. You can use those molehills as fantastic spots to do your wildflower planting. So wildflowers tend to often are broadcast over very large areas, and you can't really see the effect. You come back and look for the wildflowers. They may be there, but they've been so thinly distributed, they're almost indistinguishable. Molehills are a great way of dosing very heavily with your wildflower seed mix. All the wildflowers that the students and children have grown, you plant them in the molehills, and you get these little pockets, these hot spots of wildflower and the colour that brings to your grounds. So lumpy surfaces, use molehills, berry stuff. So if you've just felled some trees or you've done some hedge trimming, you've got some inert material, rubble is also fantastic, then you can include that in this way of making lumpy surfaces because you'll create hollows underground, and those hollows will be used by hibernating reptiles. So if you've got slow worms, that's where they'll head. Lots of things need that subterranean habitat, and you can build subterranean habitat by burying interesting and useful habitat under this lumpy ground. So lumpy surfaces are fantastic. Try and fit them in wherever you can. Reuse materials to support that project. Okay, next one, please, Timmy. Water. So you may already have a school pond. I know it's difficult sometimes to kind of live with ponds and the worries over safety for sure, absolutely understood, but they can be extremely small and yet still function very valuably as wildlife habitat. So you may have frogs and toads, and that's fantastic, but even if you don't, then lots of invertebrates will find their way to very tiny ponds, micro pools. So the bottom right, that tiny little pot with some sticks in it, is for hoverflies. Now, a whole bunch of hoverflies will lay their eggs in swampy ground, certainly in water, but even in damp soil, they will lay their eggs. So if you have a container that is even slightly marshy, so you fill it up with leaf litter, soil and stones, those sticks are so that the hoverflies can actually land on them and you can see them, because it's nice to be able to encounter those things and have some kind of wildlife experience. They will use them, they will lay their eggs in that swampy bit of ground, which you can keep topped up with water as part of a school project, perhaps. And you'll get another generation of hoverflies the next year. And of course, if you're putting these little pots, which are supporting that part of the life cycle, next door to interesting plants that are providing nectar, then you're basically creating an entire ecosystem. Hoverflies will be egg laying in your little marsh pot. They'll be emerging as adults, feeding on the flowers that are just next door but within your school, and then egg laying back in there again. So they're not really having to leave your school grounds at all. And you'll be drawing in these populations of wildlife that will stick, and you will see more of them each year. You can have planters and pots will create fantastic bog gardens. You can just leave them to colonize naturally, just put a bit of substrate at the bottom. You can, as you see there, plant them up in a more ornamental and creative way. Either way, bring water into your school grounds in whatever way you can by using these small containers. So they're safe, they're easier to manage. Again, you can have them very small, very big. You can build them in terraces. You can sink little plastic pots in the flower beds that you already have and allow those to fill up. Water somewhere within your grounds, however small, is tremendously valuable and will certainly support a much wider range of wildlife. And there are so many ways of introducing it into the way that you think about school grounds. Okay, next one, please, Denise. Nest and roost boxes. Of course, you'll be familiar with this. So putting bird boxes up on the wall of your school or on any of the buildings that you have access to is always a good thing. You can put them on any trees you may have to, and there are a huge array of bird boxes. Generally, there are hole-fronted ones for things like blue tits. There are open-fronted ones that have like a wide letterbox at the front, and that's for things like blackbirds, robins, spotted flycatchers. So try and use those if you have suitable places to put them up. But the key conservation priorities are a whole bunch of species that actually require buildings. So certainly in England and generally in the UK, swifts in particular, house martins, just don't nest anywhere else. There are very few cliff nesting house martins, even fewer cliff nesting swifts left, although that's where they would have originally nested. So they come to the built environment, to our buildings, to look for holes and crannies under the eaves in the case of house martins to build their mud nests. If you can put up boxes that are ready made for them, so you don't have to worry about the integrity of your building. Obviously, sealing up holes in buildings is a critical part of maintenance, but it stops these things finding a place to nest. Um, if you put up nest boxes for house martins, they will absolutely use them, and you can decide to place them in just the right spot. So you're putting them in places where you're content that it's not problematic, maybe over an entrance hall, an entrance to the school would be difficult. So you put them somewhere else. These are relatively cheap, 20, 30, 40 quid for these kind of installations, these fixtures and fittings, easy to install. Some of them work very quickly. House martins, for example, some may take a bit longer, but may not in the case of swifts. But swifts are in such steep decline. If you have a tall elevation, if you have a short wall, a low wall, it isn't going to work. But if you've got a two-story, three-story building up near the top of that elevation, if you can put a swift box, then eventually it is very likely to be used. If it isn't used by swifts, something else will use it. And if it's a starling or a blue tit or a house sparrow, fantastic, something's made use of it. But you're creating space and opportunity for a high priority conservation species, and you'll be doing your bit for wildlife and for nature recovery. Bats, which is the other image there, very often they're already in your school. You may not know it, but they may well be there. They don't need much space. But again, you can buy off the shelf bat boxes that go on the exterior of your school. If you have renovation work or extension work, you can buy bat boxes fully contained, so they're not going to find their way into your school, that you can actually fit into the fabric of the building so it's smooth and can be rendered over. Little tiny discrete hole, entrance hole at the bottom, and you can see examples of these around the place, and we can give you more information on this if you're interested. So there are so many ways of introducing these nesting and roosting habitats for very high priority species that have nowhere else to go. So most of our bat species, certainly more than half, need human habitation for part of their life cycle, very often for their overwintering part, sometimes for the summer breeding roosts. And certainly these species, such as house martin, swallow to a large extent as well, and above all else, swift, they simply have nowhere else to go. So if you can put these boxes up on the surface of your school, on a school wall, you'll be doing a fantastic job for wildlife. And there are so many to choose from, and it's very easy to find your way through the choice that's there. But we can give you extra information on this if you would like it. Next one, okay, overwintering. So a lot of species need room to hibernate, and that includes reptiles and amphibians. So they need to find somewhere where they can actually spend the winter, somewhere that's cool, dry but not too dry, somewhere where they're going to be safe from predation, somewhere that is relatively near the places that they're going to use when they wake up. So half the problem, you'll know this from frogs and toads getting squashed on the roads, is that the places that these animals are going to hibernate are very often distant from the places they need to then go to feed and breed. And the gap in between is often very, very hostile. Traffic, predation by pets and by wildlife. And so by bringing these things closer together, which is why I said even within your school, you can create an entire ecosystem. So creating habitat piles like a compost heap or a log pile, planting flowers that have these hollow stems in the winter, things like fennel. Fennel's a great example. Bramble's a good example, where they hollow out in the winter. Ladybirds and earwigs love these hollow stems, and you'll often find them if you break open a hollow stem in the winter, it's full of hibernating insects. Compost heaps are fantastic, and of course you can still use it for your garden. But if you build a compost heap and have some coarser material at the base and some finer material over the top, it will absolutely be found and used by hibernating species like hedgehogs, like slowworms, like common lizards, like common toads, like frogs if you've got any, certainly by newts. And the same with log piles, really easy to build, a couple of sticks on either side, bundle of larger sticks in the middle. So any kind of construction of logs or grass or rubble, so brick rubble, it doesn't look nice, but you can hide it discreetly in a corner. The right kind of plants that have this structure that allows things to use them in the winter will be doing a fantastic job by keeping species in your school. So rather than having to find overwintering and hibernation sites elsewhere, they can simply stay within your school grounds. And when they emerge, like we were talking about with hoverflies nesting in that little pot, they go straight back to feeding within your grounds. And you're beginning to create this life cycle resource, thinking of schools as ecosystems, building each of the stages that a species needs for its entire life cycle. It's a really good way of planning out a nature conservation project, a nature recovery project in your school. Okay, next one, please. Everything edible, last couple of slides. Just when you're planting stuff, think about pollen and nectar and foliage and seeds and fruits, and roots and dead wood. So that middle photo at the bottom are beetle galleries and a piece of dead wood. So lots of species do eat dead wood. They take a long time as a consequence to grow up. So some of the beetle larvae that make those galleries take 4 years to hatch out into an adult beetle. There's not a lot of nutrition in dead wood. But think about edibility. If you just plant off-the-shelf landscaping plants and shrubs, very often they don't offer any kind of food for wildlife at all. They're completely sterile. So think about a wide range of edible stuff. Fruit and vegetables are fantastic. So you can begin to combine the ideas of small allotments and growing food for humans, for us, with food for wildlife. Maximum edibility at every possibility. Think about what you're looking for, plant stuff that it feeds on. Don't forget, top left is an adult butterfly feeding on nectar, but you're not going to get that unless you have middle top caterpillars. And they feed completely differently. And some caterpillars, particularly moths, are generalists. They'll feed on almost anything, but some are very specific. That's a common blue butterfly top left. It will only feed, or largely only feed, on bird's foot trefoil, which is that lovely yellow flower on the right-hand side. So do a bit of homework. Think about the butterflies that are visiting or that you would like to visit, and make sure that there are flowers for the adults and foliage, the right kind of foliage, for the larvae. Think about grubs. Always think about grubs. They're the things that do all the work. They take on all the protein. They take the time to grow. The adults is a very short bit of that life cycle for most invertebrates. It's the grubs that do all the work. What do they need? Okay, next one, please. Okay, last one. I'm going to hand back to Deneen to take you through the mapping. Think about over the fence, where your school grounds end. Think about distances beyond. Now, wildlife, most of our wildlife is small. It doesn't travel huge distances. So 150 meters, 300 meters, 500 meters, this idea of a radius around your school, you can really use to try and home in on other places that you may be able to work with. There may be a church within 100 meters of your school. Well, some of the wildlife that you're growing in your grounds will find its way that far. So maybe there's a relationship with that church, with that park, with another school. 300 meters a bit further, what else is there? So you're this idea of stepping stones out from your school. So again, to get away from feeling you have to take your young people, your children, your students right the way across the island to see wildlife. How about building a fantastic ecosystem within your school that is spreading out, and you can take the school out within 100 meters, within 300 meters, within 500 meters, to another project, to another site, working with another organization within walking distance that is also working for ecology. Small distances for wildlife are exactly the same as small distances for humans. So if we're walking somewhere that we can manage, we can do another project that the wildlife from your school will absolutely find. So go beyond the fence, but you don't have to go very far. And use this idea of a distance within which you're trying to find other places to work with as a way of extending the benefit of what you're doing and expanding the possibilities of nature recovery and of wildlife encounter. So there's a bit of a rattle through. Those are all projects and ideas that you may want to think about doing. I'm going to hand back to Deneen now to have a look at the mapping tool within the LNRS.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, as Ian said, looking over the fence and seeing where you could add value to the things that surround you is a really good place to start. And as I mentioned at the start, the LNRS and the map that's been built from it is a super useful resource to not only see what potential actions could be undertaken just from looking at your school site and what lies around it, but also what species there are around your site that could also be supported. I'm going to hopefully try and switch the view. Okay, is it showing the Island Nature website? Reshare. Okay, so I've just taken us to the Island Nature website. So this is where all of the LNRS resources are held. The website, we'll be able to pop it in the chat, but it's islandnature.org.uk. So scrolling down here, this is where you can view all of the documents that I explained earlier. And scrolling down a little further, you can also visit the local habitat map. So clicking on this takes you to the fully interactive local habitat map for the Isle of Wight. So this should look similar to what we saw earlier, the blue being that protected site network surrounded by that green of all the opportunity to recover nature on the Isle of Wight. On the map, you can view, if we turn these two off, for example, all the different habitat types of actions that can be carried out on the Isle of Wight. So if we were to turn on catchment and river measures, so what actions could we carry out to support rivers, it will show you all the different types of actions that can be undertaken and where those actions will have the biggest benefit. To then zoom in and see what all this map stuff means, you can click on each coloured action. This one, for example, is all about protecting and enhancing the health of chalk streams. And then within the information box, you get some additional detail that helps you understand what it means to deliver this on the ground. And importantly, what other species benefit directly from the actions that could be carried out in this area. So all the different habitat categories are listed on here, and it is a lot of fun to just play around with the map and see what is possible. But the Isle of Wight local habitat map also has this spatial filter tool, which is really useful for, as Ian was just demonstrating, understanding what is possible 150 meters, 500 meters, even a kilometer around the site of your school. So if we go back to the bay, just because it's the school I went to, and we were to use one of the spatial filter tools, so clicking on this one to draw a polygon, And just to draw around the school site, double click to finish and clicking apply, we give it a minute or so. From drawing this boundary, it will read all of the different types of habitat actions that are possible in this area and show you a list of what can be achieved just in this area alone. So from this, I can see we need to support natural flood management um, by designing high ecological value floodplains. So potentially, if I wanted to do some nature recovery on the school site, I might want to make sure it aligns with any wetland recovery that's happening in the floodplain that sits pretty much next door. You can see all the river networks just there, pretty much next door to the school site. Um, Prevent the degradation of grassland habitats arriving from nutrient enrichment. So again, I could look into this grassland type measure and see what this means, see what species I could support, see what things I could potentially plant directly on my school site. And again, this would be supporting the wider area around. So I won't go through the full list, but it's a really handy way to play around with an area of interest, whether it is just fixed to the school site, the school field itself, or the school area. So I don't know, a 500-meter area around the school to see what types of species can be supported, what habitat actions can be delivered, and how you can go about delivering them. So I'll stop there on the map and just go back to the slides very briefly. So as well as the LNRS, the LNRS documents and the LNRS local habitat map, there is, as I'm sure you're aware, a huge library of resources available to support actions for schools, supporting the curriculum, and making this stuff doable on a school site scale. Eco Schools is one of them. We've got Katie Hurd on the call, who's at the council ready to support schools in accessing this kind of information that provides lots of resources of what small scale, easy to do options could be delivered on the school site. Alongside this, we've also got the National Education Nature Park. So this is an initiative from the Department of Education happening at the same time as the local nature recovery strategy to support schools in mapping all the habitats that are available on their site. So as part of this program, schools get support with mapping software, mapping apps, so kids in the lessons can then go out, map all the habitats on the site, and then measure changes or additional species they see year on year, depending on the actions that are taken to recover nature, which can be directly informed by the LNRS. And then alongside the documents, we're in the process of producing even more toolkits to support on the ground activity. One of them being, as shown below in the image, a 10 steps to nature recovery. So these are, not sure if you can see me, but they're small card things with 10 steps within of if anyone was to do nature recovery anywhere, following these 10 steps is an easy way to start that will have immense impact just from small actions that can be undertaken. And again, these are available across all libraries, and we've got plenty here that we could provide to schools as well to support that activity. Now I'll hand back to Ian just to finish on the biosphere.
Great, thanks, Deneen. Yes, so just last message really that everything we're talking about, of course, sits within the Isle of Wight UNESCO World Biosphere. So I'm sure you're aware, but the whole of the Isle of Wight and much more beyond. The Isle of Wight, 380 square kilometres, 12 square kilometres of intertidal. The whole of the Isle of Wight Biosphere is 900 square kilometres. So it's huge, and it includes pretty much the whole of the Solent. It runs up to the Sussex coast, really, the boundary, similarly to Dorset and similarly to Hampshire. So it's an enormous regional resource. And the LNRS and the nature recovery journey that we are talking about and that you have such an important part to play in is fundamental to the future of the biosphere. And the biosphere is really all about finding better ways of accommodating human and non-human life, sharing the same places, living in the same place at the same time, finding better ways of actually making a good life between us in the places where we live and work. And so the work that we're talking about, especially in schools, finding new, interesting and productive ways to support wildlife, but to support learning and to create an enriched environment for both, for people and for wildlife, in an enriched place, people, place and wildlife. This idea of enriching that entire bundle at the smaller scale and at the larger scale through replication, not trying to do everything everywhere, but doing these hot spots of intervention that help us and the natural world at the same time and help us to actually find a better way of getting along for the future. That's a fundamental part, and perhaps the fundamental part of what the UNESCO World Biosphere is all about. And so anything that you're doing, everything that you're doing that is supporting that idea is critical to the future of a successful Isle of Wight biosphere. So thank you for everything that you're trying to do. Thank you.
We've got a few minutes left, so if anyone's got any questions, do feel free to pipe up. Just take yourselves off of mute and give us a shout. And thank you very much to everyone that's joined us. And we had some people pop in late, so we've got Nettleston on the call as well. It's really nice to see. Key Arts and the Wild Heart Sanctuary as well.
I have a question. Okay, my school has lots of these kind of trees, and especially oaks. And a year ago, we have hundreds. Children planted hundreds, took home, and then said, "Mrs., I have such a big oak. I don't know what to do. My mom doesn't want to put it in the garden." I said, "Oh, what to do? Because we can't plant in our conservative forest." I would like if any, just like government, have a special day like recycling, like gardening, collecting, and all schools, we could put all these hundreds of oak trees because children live in apartments, but they grew quite big. If they collected from schools, collected from their gardens, from householding, because people probably would be free to give. We have 5 sycamores growing out of seeds. We can't plant them because that would be different. So it would be nice, maybe some schools could have, you know what I mean? Because we have loads of, and now other trees we are planting. And I'm thinking, what to do next? This summer, I knew that there is gorilla planting, but I don't think it's a good idea to come and plant. You know, children like, and we have lots of acorns this year, and we're planting, but then what to do?
Yeah, it's really, really good point. And in fact, I think it's a really important point that all of this amazing effort that goes into growing things in schools, and then quite often, but then quite often it's difficult to know what to do with that material. Where does it go? What do we do with it? Now, I think there are a number of things we can do to support that. One is that there's a new tree warden scheme about to be launched. It's going to be launched next Monday. So, and there was one in the past, and what that will mean is that there will, at some point, it may not be immediate, there will be a tree warden local to your school. So every parish will have a tree warden, and that they're voluntary positions, and they will be looking for tree planting projects, for spaces within their parish. It may be in a park, it may be on a roadside verge, but they will know where there are possibilities for tree planting. So the connection between a tree warden and the school, I think, is something that can be developed. And the new tree wardening scheme, which is going to be coordinated by the beginnings of a network, once it's launched next Monday, I think we'll have communication going out to anyone who wants to be a part of that. And certainly, I think schools will be crucial to that. But also, just wanted to mention, coming back to pots, there's absolutely no reason, in fact, there's every reason to think about, and it's a bonsai kind of project, it's true, but using quite big planters to keep some of those trees in. Now, obviously, an oak tree is going to last an awful long time, but if you've got a selection of things that have been grown, you can build a tiny forest. Absolutely, you can in a large planter. Even if you've got a handful of small oaks and they're maybe 3 or 4 foot high, in a large planter, they'll do okay for a while, and you can put other things underneath them, and you can begin to build this idea of a small layered woodland in a pot. So you can keep some of that material and play about with it and create these kind of pot forest environments. So there's scope to do these things. Interesting point that there's a new tree nursery from Chloe. So it looks like with the tree wardens, with possibilities within the school and the beginnings of new tree nursery projects, there may be solutions to this. You're absolutely right. It would be great if we can be encouraging schools to grow plant material on that, some retained in the school, others is distributed. That would be really good. Yeah.
And another one, I've been on your site, and I would like if it could be share and collect, because we have a wormery, worms from California, this tiger, and we make in compost, we are collecting the grass from the field, where they grow, the children know coffee, collecting tea. But then I would like to share because they are taking home, my nature club taking home. Then we put in our beds, and where cabbage caterpillars have eaten all our cabbages, but tomatoes, garlic survived. I would like if some schools could collect because they're very nice. They are in a classroom in our box, and because people ask, did I share? Yes, I did, but not between schools. If it could be nice, come to my school, and I'm happy to give you a huge box. It would be hundreds of these worms, and children love them, and then they eat everything that children collect from breakfast. And I would like to share with someone, but I can't say, do you need any worms?
It's quite a nice idea, isn't it, to have the big sort of, like a sort of a school shares, sharesies across all the schools across that whole kilometre, whether it's worms or trees or seed collections and everything. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I think it's
sorry, I'm again about the habitats. Sorry, the last one about the habitats. We have hedgehogs, we have bird houses, everything squirrel. But would it be a button to help if you need help? Because we put the bat house quite low, because my school gave me a very small ladder, which is quite 1 meter, but because of safety. But the bat house must be 5 meters. I would like someone to come, professional, with a ladder and do, because bats are not coming, only spiders. Children are disappointed because it's 2 meters, it's not high enough. And the bird houses, we put the bird houses, but it's still so low because we can't hire the trees, which is higher, Could we someone to come and help with, I think the same problem has any householding. For example, people in my street would have big trees. They would like to put a bird house, but somebody needs to climb quite high, and because some trees are quite big. You know what I mean? It could be some professionals to come to bird house to make habitats in people's gardens and schools.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. So there's a couple of things there. One, I think that collaboration between schools, which is you've talked about, I think is a fantastic idea. And the idea of sharing, this is where, again, coming back to pot gardens. So there have been lovely projects, for example, where bee orchids have been rescued from roadside verges and grown in a pot. And that pot has then been shared between schools. And because those bee orchids, and they have them for a year, and so they go through their life cycle and they spread bee orchid seeds. They take a long time to germinate. But this idea of bee orchids popping up in all the schools that have shared this pot is a lovely idea. And I think the idea of sharing wildlife projects between schools, and I know Katie's on the call, maybe that's something that Eco School supports, or certainly Green Impact might support. There are ways I think we can try and work together to facilitate that. In terms of actually just the physical installation of some of these rather demanding things, particularly the stuff that's got to go high, absolutely right. And I think there's much more we can do to support individual schools, and some schools will have facility to do that and some won't. There are organisations like Wight Swift who actually come and do installation to help homeowners. So that may be that's something that, again, we can integrate into eco schools or into a wider kind of environmental program. But just final point on that, as well as putting bird boxes in the right place and bat boxes in the right place, absolutely right. That's what we should be doing. Even if you can't, putting them in the wrong place, as you've just said, something will live in it. And that is still really worthwhile. So we have actually used bird boxes as hibernation sites for small invertebrates for that very reason. And the reason is that they work so well is you can lift the lid. So in terms of actually getting access to a whole load of hibernating insects, using a bird box literally at ground level that you can lift the lid on and all the kids can see what's inside, works beautifully. So redeploying some of these things for other uses is still worth considering. But yeah, totally take your point. Networks of sharing and assistance with some of this installation work, I think is something we can take away and think about. So brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean we'll wrap up shortly, but just to say, Oksana, I've had white swifts have put up swift boxes at my house. I've seen dormice in bug boxes in bug hotels at at sort of eye height. And actually there is a tree nursery around the corner from you in Oakfield in Slade Road, so we can always give them a nudge. Most of the trees got deployed from there years ago, but there's still some in there, so we could always give Sovereign a nudge and say Oakfield Primary would like to site them. But as Ian says, I've got oak trees and hedges actually in planters that have been going for 20 years, and they're still doing really well. So we can do all that. So we call it time. Has anybody got any other questions? So I think what we'll do is we'll let you all head off. But thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, we, as Ian says, we'll take everything on board that you've said, and I'll give everybody a shout via email, and keep in touch. So and let us know how you get on, obviously, as well.
Oh, can I say
Oh
something?
yeah, sure. Go,
I was
Claire.
gonna say, this is all in development, but obviously the CEP would love to celebrate what schools are doing. If any of these kind of project ideas have sparked today, if you do decide to embark on one of those projects, please email, yourselves or email me and say we're doing it, and can we share that and shout about it, and the Cultural Education Partnership will help to do that and share what the schools are doing and just try to build on that and get other schools involved. So please keep in contact and let me know if you're doing any of this. It would be really
That's a brilliant idea, Claire. Absolutely, and actually we can then that we don't think we got a chance to mention it, but just kind of that monitoring, making sure that we know what's what the literally bugs on seats are, what the response of wildlife has been in the schools. That'd be absolutely invaluable. So and we can continue to map that as well. So I think that's where the nature education pack comes in as well. But yeah, that would be really brilliant. So and we're all working really closely together as well. So that's that kind of that whole network we can build, which would be absolutely amazing. So just thanks very much for the comments in chat as well, guys. There you go. And Deneen is just saying there's the newsletter now, of course. So don't forget to sign up. Again, I'll send you the emails for me and for us and for Claire at Creative Island as well. But anyway, thank you so much. And Claire, thank you very, very much for helping spread the word as well at the Education Partnership. Anything on eco schools, we'll send you Katie's email if you haven't got it already. Because I know that signing up to that will also be quite important. There's Katie's just giving us a thumbs up. So excellent. Well, we'll let you go. Thanks so much, everybody. Lovely, lovely to meet you all. And we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks all.